The ex-convict was tortured for 17 years, then he appeared with an impossible recording that made the entire city beg for forgiveness. And that moment began with 3 words that would shatter everything. "You'll want to hear this." Rafael's voice cut through the elegant chatter like a blade through silk. The grand ballroom of City Hall went silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the gaunt man standing at the back in trance, his trembling hands clutching a small digital recorder. "Security! Get that trash out of here." Mayor Augustus Brennan's voice cracked with barely concealed panic. He recognized that scarred face immediately. Everyone in power did. Rafael Souza was 52 years old now, though he looked closer to 70. 17 years ago, he'd been just another construction worker, 35, married to his childhood sweetheart, father to a 6-year-old daughter who drew pictures of superheroes. 17 years ago, 3 police officers dragged him from his bed at 2 a.m., and his life became a nightmare no amount of money could buy your way out of. "One more step and every single one of you will regret it for the rest of your miserable lives," Rafael said. His voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. But his eyes, those told a different story. They held the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's been through hell and came back with a purpose. Judge Henry Caldwell, the evening's guest of honor celebrating 50 years on the bench, rose slowly from his seat at the head table. His champagne-flushed face drained of color. "Rafael, you should be dead." Rafael finished, a bitter smile crossing his cracked lips. "That's what you tried to make happen for 17 years, wasn't it, Your Honor? Or should I call you something else?" Flashbacks hit him like lightning. The first interrogation room, where Detective Marcus Webb smiled too wide for someone investigating a murder. The whispered conversations between guards when they thought he'd passed out from the beatings. The trial that lasted less than 3 hours. The knowing glances exchanged between the judge and the prosecutor when they thought no one was watching. "Guards, arrest this man immediately." Dr. Clarence Foster, City Council President, commanded. But the 2 security officers hesitated, their eyes fixed on the recorder in Rafael's hands. 17 years, Rafael continued, each word weighted with the kind of pain that transforms men. 17 years in a cell darker than any nightmare you've ever had. 17 years being tortured for a crime I didn't commit. 17 years while all of you. He gestured slowly around the room, pointing at faces that suddenly couldn't meet his gaze. Built your fortunes, your reputations, your perfect little lives on top of a lie. District Attorney Beatrice Hartley choked on her wine. She'd been the prosecutor who demanded 30 years, who called Rafael a monster in her closing arguments. "This is insane. This man is a convicted criminal. He was sentenced for the murder of Amanda Foster, 19 years old, daughter of then-Councilman Clarence Foster," Rafael completed, his eyes locking onto the man who now looked physically ill. "Except Amanda Foster isn't dead, is she?" A wave of shocked murmurs crashed through the ballroom like thunder. "He's lost his mind in prison. Someone call the police." Rafael raised the recorder above his head. This device contains 47 minutes of audio. A very interesting conversation between Judge Henry Caldwell, Detective Marcus Webb, then Prosecutor Robert Manning, and Councilman Clarence Foster. A conversation that took place 3 days before Amanda's supposed death. A conversation where you planned, in meticulous detail, how to make a girl disappear, and frame the most convenient poor worker you could find. That's a lie. Judge Caldwell's composure shattered completely. "Guards, arrest him now. He's fabricating." "Rafael works perfectly," Rafael quoted, pressing play. Judge Caldwell's unmistakable voice filled the room through speakers. "He renovated Foster's house last month. Easy to plant evidence. Nobody will question it. He's poor, uneducated, no resources to properly defend himself." Rafael paused the recording. The silence that followed was deafening. Mayor Brennan's hands shook as he loosened his tie. Professor Morgan, head of the University Ethics Board, turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "The question isn't whether you'll try to kill me now to protect your secrets," Rafael said, carefully pocketing the recorder. "The question is how many copies of this recording are already in the right hands. How many journalists received this file via email in the last 2 hours? How many physical copies were sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to civil rights organizations, to news networks across the country? Councilman Foster, who'd remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?"
"Money? We can."
"I want," Rafael interrupted, his voice now carrying an emotion so raw it made people physically recoil, "this entire city to know what kind of monsters you really are. I want every person in this room to feel what it's like to have your life stolen. I want justice." That's when the main doors burst open. A woman approximately 36 years old entered, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Her face was familiar to many present, the same green eyes, the same chestnut hair.
"My God."
Someone whispered. It's impossible." "Amanda Foster," the woman announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I'm here to tell the truth about the night my own father forced me to disappear to protect his corruption schemes." Judge Caldwell stumbled backward, grasping for his chair. Councilman Foster tried desperately to reach the back exit, but FBI agents were already blocking every door. In that moment, as the room erupted into chaos and camera phones began recording from every angle, Rafael felt something he hadn't experienced in 17 years. Not quite happiness, but something close to peace. Because everyone still thought the recording was the worst evidence he had. Everyone still believed they understood the full scope of their downfall. If they knew what else was secured in a bank vault, with instructions to be released if anything happened to him in the next 48 hours, they would be on their knees right now. Documents that proved this conspiracy went far deeper than one framed man. Bank transfers, falsified court records, connections to 3 other unsolved cases where convenient suspects had taken the fall. But Rafael had learned something during 17 years in hell: real justice isn't served all at once. It's delivered in calculated doses, each revelation more devastating than the last. And their fall had only just begun. If you're feeling this story's intensity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will make tonight look like mercy. The ballroom descended into pandemonium. Camera flashes erupted from every angle as guests scrambled for exits that FBI agents had already sealed. Judge Caldwell collapsed into his chair, his trembling hands knocking over a crystal glass that shattered across the white tablecloth. The sound reminded Rafael of something else, the sound of his ribs breaking during the first month in that cell. "This is a setup." Detective Webb, now Deputy Chief Webb, shoved his way through the crowd, his face red with rage. "That recording is fabricated. Deepfake technology. This convict is trying to." "Deepfake." Amanda Foster stepped forward, pulling a manila folder from her leather bag. "Then explain these." She scattered photographs across the head table. Images of herself at different ages, 16, 17, 18, standing beside her father at various locations. All dated after her supposed murder. "Or maybe you'd like to explain the bank account my father maintained for me in Switzerland. The one that's been receiving deposits every month for 17 years. Councilman Foster's legs gave out. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Amanda, please, you don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly, Dad." Her voice cracked, years of buried guilt finally surfacing. "I was 17 when you told me we had to disappear for a few months. You said it was for your campaign, that we'd come back once things settled. You never told me you'd framed an innocent man. You never told me someone was rotting in prison because of your ambition." Rafael watched the scene unfold with an expression that disturbed those who noticed it. Not satisfaction, not anger, but something colder. Calculation. Because this revelation, as explosive as it was, represented only the first domino. The real story went deeper than anyone in that room imagined. 17 years earlier, Rafael had been finishing renovations on the Foster family's summer house when he overheard something he shouldn't have. Through an open window, voices discussing numbers that made no sense for a city councilman's salary. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. A development deal that would displace 300 low-income families. He'd kept working, said nothing, figured it wasn't his business. 2 weeks later, Amanda Foster was declared dead. 3 weeks later, Rafael was arrested. The evidence appeared impossibly fast, her blood in his truck, her jewelry in his garage, her hair on his work clothes. Every piece planted with surgical precision. The trial was a joke. His public defender, later disbarred for unrelated reasons, met with him exactly twice. Judge Caldwell rushed through proceedings, denied every motion for additional time. District Attorney Hartley painted him as a predator, a construction worker who developed an obsession with a beautiful councilman's daughter. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. What they didn't show at trial were the real crime scene photos, the ones that disappeared from evidence. What they didn't mention was the forensic expert who tried to testify that the blood patterns were inconsistent with the prosecution's timeline. That expert died in a car accident before the trial concluded. You want to know what 17 years feels like? Rafael's voice cut through the chaos, silencing the room again. Let me paint you a picture. Year 1, they broke 3 ribs and told me it was because I tripped. Year 2, solitary confinement for 6 months after I filed a complaint about guard brutality. Year 3, they transferred me to a facility where the warden owed Judge Caldwell a personal favor. His hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady as stone. By year 5, my wife had divorced me. My daughter, Emily, was 7 when they took me. She stopped visiting by year 8. Last I heard, she changed her last name. Can't blame her. Who wants to be the daughter of the man who supposedly murdered a teenage girl? Mayor Brennan tried to regain control. This is all very tragic, but these are serious accusations without proof beyond an alleged recording that. Without proof. Rafael laughed, the sound hollow. You want proof, Augustus? Let's talk about the cash deposits you received from Foster's development company 3 months before Amanda's disappearance. Or the vacation property in the Hamptons that somehow appeared in your wife's name right after my trial. Or should we discuss the promotion Detective Webb received 1 week after securing my conviction? Webb lunged forward, but 2 FBI agents intercepted him. You're going to regret this, he snarled. You think you're smart? You're nothing. Still nothing. A construction worker playing detective. This little show won't change anything. That's what they still didn't understand. They saw a broken man, someone to be dismissed. They looked at Rafael's scarred face and gaunt frame and saw weakness. But 17 years in hell had taught him something more valuable than they'd learned in their mansions and country clubs: patience. You're right about one thing, Marcus, Rafael said quietly. I'm not smart. I'm just a construction worker. But you know what construction workers are really good at? We know how foundations work. We understand that you can't see what's holding a building up until you start digging. And I've been digging for a very long time. Rafael pulled out his phone, scrolled through it with deliberate slowness, then held it up for the nearest camera crew. On the screen was a bank statement, Judge Caldwell's personal account, showing a wire transfer of $250,000 from an offshore corporation registered to Councilman Foster, dated 2 days before Rafael's arrest. That's forgery. Caldwell shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Funny thing about digital banking records, they're really hard to fake. But they're incredibly easy to access when you have the right help. And I've had 17 years to make friends with some very talented people. People who believe in actual justice. Dr. Hartley backed toward the exit, her face ashen. She'd built her entire career on that case, used it to launch her campaign for district attorney. This is entrapment. You can't just... Can't what? Investigate the people who destroyed my life? I'm just a concerned citizen exercising his rights. Unlike you, I'm not breaking any laws. I'm just telling the truth. The FBI agents moved through the crowd, approaching specific individuals. Handcuffs appeared. Judge Caldwell sank deeper into his chair as an agent read him his rights. Councilman Foster wept openly, his political mask finally crumbling. Detective Webb's face contorted with impotent rage as agents secured his wrists behind his back. But Rafael's expression remained eerily calm. Because even as these powerful men faced their first taste of accountability, even as cameras captured their humiliation, he knew something they didn't. This was just the public-facing part of his revenge. The part designed for maximum embarrassment, for headlines and social media fury. The real consequences, the ones that would systematically dismantle everything they'd built, the evidence that would surface over the coming weeks linking them to crimes far worse than framing one construction worker, those were still waiting in the shadows. Sealed envelopes in lawyers' offices. Scheduled emails queued to send to specific journalists. Testimony from witnesses who'd been too scared to speak before but were now protected by federal agreements. And somewhere in the city, there was still one more player in this conspiracy who hadn't shown their face yet. Someone whose role had been so carefully hidden that even Amanda didn't know the full truth about who'd actually orchestrated her disappearance. Someone who was probably watching this unfold on live news right now, thinking they'd escaped detection. Rafael had saved that name for last. The one person who would never see their reckoning coming until it was far too late. 3 months after his arrest, Rafael had stopped screaming during interrogations. That's when they knew they'd broken him, or so they thought. What they didn't see was the shift happening behind his eyes, the moment when survival instinct transformed into something more dangerous: strategy. The first ally came in year 4. Marcus Chun, a paralegal serving 8 years for exposing corruption in his previous law firm, noticed Rafael in the prison library. Most inmates avoided the legal section. Rafael practically lived there. "You're wasting your time," Marcus had said, sliding into the opposite chair. "The system that put you here isn't going to let you out through paperwork." Rafael looked up from a book on evidence admissibility. "Then I'll learn the system well enough to destroy it from the inside." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "You might actually be crazy enough to do it. I like that." Over the next 6 years, Marcus taught Rafael everything: legal procedures, how to file motions, where to find loopholes, how the powerful protected themselves. More importantly, he taught Rafael patience. "Revenge is architecture," Marcus would say. "You need a blueprint before you start building." The second ally appeared in year 9. Thomas Rivera, a correctional officer who transferred from another facility, noticed irregularities in Rafael's case file. Things that didn't add up. Medical reports that contradicted each other. Visitor logs that had been altered. Thomas didn't introduce himself immediately. He watched. He verified. He dug through old files that had been archived and forgotten. When he finally approached Rafael during an evening shift, his first words were, "Someone very powerful wants you buried here." "I know," Rafael replied quietly. "I might be able to help. But I need to know, are you guilty?" Rafael met his eyes without flinching. "I've had 10 years to think about that question. If I were guilty, I would have confessed by now just to make the torture stop. Innocent people hold on longer because we have nothing else left." Thomas took a risk that could have cost him his career. He started making copies. Guard logs showing Rafael in solitary during times when reports claimed he was violent in the yard. Medical records documenting injuries that officials attributed to his clumsiness. Financial records he shouldn't have had access to, showing unusual payment patterns to certain corrections officers. But the real breakthrough came in year 12, from the most unlikely source. Gregory Walsh had been Judge Caldwell's clerk for 15 years before his conscience finally overwhelmed his fear. He'd watched case after case manipulated, evidence suppressed, verdicts predetermined. Rafael's case haunted him specifically because of how young Amanda had been, how calculated the entire conspiracy seemed. Gregory didn't visit Rafael directly. Too dangerous. Instead, he created a digital breadcrumb trail. An anonymous email to Thomas Rivera with an encrypted file. Inside were audio recordings from the judge's chambers, conversations Gregory had secretly preserved using a recorder hidden in a law book. 17 different cases over 20 years where Caldwell had coordinated with prosecutors and police to ensure specific outcomes. Rafael's case was just one in a pattern of systemic corruption. The recording that would eventually destroy them at City Hall? That came from Gregory's archive, preserved for over 17 years. But getting evidence was only half the battle. Rafael needed a way to survive long enough to use it. The conspirators had people inside the prison, guards who owed them favors, inmates who'd been promised early release for handling problems quietly. In year 14, someone poisoned Rafael's food. He spent 3 weeks in the infirmary, losing 30 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. Thomas Rivera identified the guard responsible and quietly transferred him to another facility, but the message was clear: Rafael was still a target. That's when Marcus made the suggestion that would change everything. You need insurance. Something that goes public if anything happens to you. Something so devastating they can't risk touching you. Rafael spent the next 2 years building exactly that. Letters to be opened upon his death. Emails scheduled to send automatically if he didn't log in weekly. Physical evidence stored in safety deposit boxes with instructions for trusted lawyers. He turned himself into a dead man's switch, more dangerous deceased than alive. Meanwhile, the outside world moved on. Judge Caldwell received humanitarian awards. Councilman Foster won re-election twice. Detective Webb became deputy chief. They built monuments to themselves while Rafael counted days in a cell. But Rafael was building something too, invisible and inexorable. Every legal motion he filed, every appeal he submitted, they all looked like the desperate actions of a guilty man refusing to accept his fate. What the conspirators didn't realize was that each filing established legal precedent, created official records, documented their responses and contradictions. He was constructing a labyrinth of paper trails that would eventually lead investigators straight to their crimes. Year 16 brought the miracle. The Supreme Court ruling on a separate case that inadvertently created grounds for Rafael's release. His lawyers, real ones this time, pro bono attorneys from a civil rights organization Marcus had connected him with, filed an emergency motion. 6 months of legal battles followed. The night before his release hearing, someone made one final attempt. A shank, crude but effective, wielded by an inmate whose sentence would mysteriously be reduced 3 months later. Rafael saw it coming. 17 years taught you to see threats from miles away, and dodged just enough that the blade caught his shoulder instead of his throat. Thomas Rivera found him bleeding in the shower. "They're terrified," he said while applying pressure to the wound. "You're getting out, and they know it." "Good," Rafael whispered through gritted teeth. "Let them be afraid. They're about to learn what real fear feels like." 3 weeks later, a judge who owed nothing to Caldwell or Foster reviewed his case with fresh eyes. Technical violations in the original trial. Suppressed evidence. Witness testimonies that contradicted physical facts. The judge didn't declare Rafael innocent, not yet, but ordered his immediate release pending a full investigation. Rafael walked out of prison on a Tuesday morning with $73 in gate money, a garbage bag containing his possessions, and a plan 17 years in the making. Thomas Rivera picked him up in his personal vehicle, Marcus Chun sitting in the back seat. They drove to a safe house Gregory Walsh had arranged, where boxes of documented evidence waited. "You could take this to the authorities now," Gregory said. "Let them handle it officially." Rafael shook his head, fingers tracing the scar on his shoulder. "They've had 17 years to handle it officially. They chose not to. Now we do it my way, public, devastating, impossible to ignore." That's when they planned the City Hall confrontation. Not just to expose the conspiracy, but to do it in front of cameras, witnesses, and the very people who'd spent nearly 2 decades celebrating their victory over him. Rafael wanted them to feel what he'd felt, powerless, exposed, with nowhere to run. But even now, sitting in that safe house surrounded by evidence, Rafael held one secret back from even his closest allies. One name he hadn't shared. Because the person who'd actually orchestrated Amanda's disappearance, who'd coordinated all the players, who'd benefit most from the conspiracy, that person wasn't at City Hall tonight. That person was much closer to home than anyone suspected. And Rafael's next move would force them into the light whether they wanted to emerge or not. The real question wasn't whether justice would be served. After 17 years, Rafael had ensured that outcome was inevitable. The real question was whether the city could handle the truth about who'd really been pulling the strings all along. The FBI agents escorted Judge Caldwell, Councilman Foster, and Deputy Chief Webb from the ballroom in handcuffs, but Rafael remained motionless at the podium. The news cameras were still rolling. Hundreds of phones still recording. This was exactly what he needed. "Before anyone leaves," Rafael's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, "there's something else you need to hear." The full recording. Mayor Brennan, halfway to the exit, froze. His face went from pale to ashen. "That's not necessary. The authorities have copies, they'll." "Oh, I think it's very necessary, Augustus." Rafael pressed play on the recorder, and this time he didn't stop after the first incriminating line. Judge Caldwell's voice filled the room again, but now the full context emerged. The foster girl knows too much. She overheard the entire development scheme. We can't risk her talking to anyone, especially not after the Times started sniffing around our permits. Another voice, Councilman Foster, younger but unmistakable, "She's my daughter, Henry. There has to be another way." "There isn't. But we don't have to hurt her. We relocate her, set her up somewhere comfortable. She disappears, we claim foul play, and we need a suspect who can't fight back." Then a third voice, one that made several people in the ballroom gasp. Mayor Augustus Brennan, 17 years younger but crystal clear, I know just the person. Rafael Souza. He's been asking questions about the permits, noticed some irregularities. He's smart enough to be dangerous, but poor enough that nobody will believe him over us. Mayor Brennan lunged toward Rafael, desperation overtaking caution. That's fabricated. Audio manipulation. You can't. Thomas Rivera stepped forward from the crowd, his correctional officer uniform still pressed and official. Actually, we can verify authenticity. I had 3 independent forensic audio labs analyze that recording. All confirmed it's genuine, unaltered, recorded 17 years ago. Their reports have already been submitted to federal prosecutors. The mayor stumbled backward, his political instincts finally recognizing a battle he couldn't win. Around him, former allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship. City council members deleted his number from their phones in real time. Campaign donors suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. But Rafael wasn't finished. He pulled out a tablet, connected it to the room's projection system. Financial records filled the screen, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell company transactions. 17 years of payments flowing between the conspirators. After Amanda disappeared, Rafael explained, his voice steady and educational like he was teaching a class, Councilman Foster's development project moved forward without opposition. The 300 low-income families who would have protested? They got relocated using eminent domain. The land was sold to Foster Development LLC for $12 million. 3 months later, it sold to a private equity firm for $87 million. He clicked to the next slide. Judge Caldwell received $2.3 million through various consulting fees. Mayor Brennan got $4.1 million, mostly through his wife's real estate company. Deputy Chief Webb's take was smaller, only $600,000, but he also got his promotion and a vacation house in Colorado. The numbers glowed on the screen, irrefutable and damning. Journalists frantically typed notes. Federal agents photographed the displays with their phones. You want to know the worst part? Rafael's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion breaking through his carefully maintained composure. It wasn't even about me. I was just convenient. A random construction worker who happened to be in the wrong place, heard the wrong conversation. They destroyed my life, my family, 17 years of my existence, and it was nothing personal. I was just collateral damage in their scheme to get rich. Amanda Foster spoke up from where she stood with the FBI agents, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know what they'd done. Dad told me we were going into witness protection, that there were threats against our family. He set me up in Switzerland, paid for everything, visited twice a year. I never questioned it because I trusted him. Her voice broke. Then last month, I finally got curious. Started searching my own name online. Found articles about my murder. About your conviction. About your daughter Emily, who'd lost her father at 7 years old. I contacted an attorney, who contacted the FBI, and that's when I learned the truth about what my disappearance cost you. Rafael looked at her, and for the first time that evening, his expression softened slightly. You were 17. You were a child. This isn't your fault. But I could have. You were a victim too, he said firmly. They took 17 years from me. They took 17 years from you too, your real life, your friends, your future. Don't carry guilt for their sins. Marcus Chen emerged from the crowd, pushing a cart loaded with document boxes. We also have evidence of 3 other cases, he announced, his paralegal training evident in his precise delivery. 3 other people convicted of crimes they likely didn't commit, all within Judge Caldwell's jurisdiction, all involving defendants who'd interfered with politically connected development projects. The pattern is unmistakable. Judge Caldwell, still in handcuffs near the door, finally cracked completely. You self-righteous hypocrite, he screamed at Rafael. You think you're better than us? You think this little performance makes you a hero? You're just an ex-con with a vendetta. Rafael walked slowly toward him, each step measured and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room. No, Henry. I'm not better than you. I'm exactly what you made me, someone with nothing left to lose and 17 years to plan how to take you down. The difference is, I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. You wore a judge's robe and sold justice to the highest bidder. I wore prison stripes and kept my integrity. He turned back to the cameras. Everything you've seen tonight, the recordings, the financial documents, the witness testimony, copies have been delivered to every major news outlet, the FBI, the State Attorney General, the Department of Justice, and several civil rights organizations. This isn't about my revenge anymore. This is about exposure. This is about making sure everyone knows that justice in this city was bought and sold like a commodity. Gregory Walsh, Judge Caldwell's former clerk, stepped forward. I've also provided testimony under oath regarding 47 other cases where I witnessed judicial misconduct. The appeals process has already begun for 12 defendants who may have been wrongly convicted. The room erupted into chaos again. Reporters shouted questions. Federal agents made phone calls. City officials tried to leave but found journalists blocking every exit, cameras rolling, questions flying. Rafael watched it all with something approaching peace. Not happiness. 17 years couldn't be undone. His daughter couldn't get her childhood back. His ex-wife couldn't unknow the trauma. But justice, real justice, was finally happening. Mayor Brennan made one last desperate play.
Rafael, please.
We can make this right. Financial compensation, public apology, anything you want. Just stop this before it destroys the entire city government. Rafael almost laughed. Destroy the city government? Augustus, your corruption already did that. I'm just making sure everyone can see the damage you caused. And as for what I want. He paused, letting the moment stretch. I want you to feel what I felt. Powerless. Exposed. Watching everything you built crumble while you can't do anything to stop it. The FBI agents began leading more people away. The city's comptroller, who'd helped hide the financial transactions. 2 more council members who'd accepted payments. A police captain who'd made sure Rafael's appeals never got proper investigation. But as satisfying as this public destruction was, Rafael knew the real consequences would unfold over the coming weeks. Criminal trials that would dominate headlines. Civil lawsuits that would bankrupt the conspirators. Professional disbarments, political exile, prison sentences that would let them taste what he'd experienced. And there was still one more revelation to come, one final piece of the puzzle that would complete his revenge. Because the person who'd first suggested using Rafael as their fall guy, who'd identified him as the perfect patsy, that person wasn't in handcuffs yet. That person had stayed in the shadows, thinking they'd escaped detection. But tomorrow morning, when that person opened their front door to find FBI agents with an arrest warrant, they'd finally understand. Rafael Souza had spent 17 years learning patience, and his memory was very, very long. 6 months after that night at City Hall, Rafael stood in front of a different building entirely. The state penitentiary reception area looked exactly like the one he'd walked out of a year ago. But this time, he was a visitor, not an inmate. Judge Henry Caldwell sat across from him in the visitation room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that stripped away every pretense of authority. 17 years on the bench, reduced to prisoner number 847392. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. You came to gloat, Caldwell said, his voice hollow. No, Rafael replied quietly. I came to show you something. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed a young woman in graduation robes, smiling at the camera. That's Emily. My daughter. She just finished her law degree. Top of her class. Caldwell stared at the photo, confused. Why are you showing me this? Because for 17 years, I missed everything. Her first day of high school. Her prom. Her college acceptance letter. You took all of that from me. Rafael's voice remained steady, but his eyes burned with intensity. But you didn't break her. You didn't break me. That's the difference between your kind of power and real strength. You built empires on lies and they crumbled in one night. I survived hell and came out stronger. The former judge looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Caldwell had been sentenced to 22 years for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and corruption. At 73, it was effectively a life sentence. Councilman Foster got 18 years and lost everything: his mansion, his reputation, even his relationship with Amanda, who'd legally changed her last name. Deputy Chief Webb received 15 years and was immediately expelled from the police force. But the final piece, the one that completed Rafael's revenge, had come just 2 weeks after the City Hall confrontation. District Attorney Beatrice Hartley, the woman who'd built her entire career prosecuting Rafael, who'd called him a monster, who'd used his case to launch herself into political prominence, she'd been the hidden architect all along. The one who'd initially suggested using a wrongful conviction to cover up the conspiracy, who'd coordinated the evidence planting, who'd ensured the trial moved too fast for proper defense. When FBI agents arrested her at her campaign headquarters during a press conference announcing her run for state governor, the cameras captured every moment. Her carefully constructed facade shattered in real time, broadcast to millions. She'd received 25 years and was housed in the same facility where Rafael had spent his first 5 years of imprisonment. Rafael left the prison and drove to a small cafe in the downtown district, where Marcus Chun waited with coffee already ordered. Marcus had been fully exonerated and reinstated to the Bar Association. He now ran a non-profit providing legal aid to wrongfully convicted individuals.
How'd it go? Marcus asked.
He looks small, Rafael said simply.
They all do now.
Thomas Rivera arrived minutes later, having just finished his shift. He'd been promoted to prison reform coordinator, using his insider knowledge to identify and eliminate corruption in the correctional system. Gregory Walsh joined them last, carrying a briefcase full of case files, 12 more potential wrongful convictions they were investigating. This had become their weekly ritual. The 4 men who'd taken down a conspiracy now worked to dismantle the corrupt system that had enabled it. They'd formed an organization called Project Second Chance, funded largely by Rafael's $47 million civil settlement against the city. Any word from Amanda?
Thomas asked.
Rafael nodded.
She's doing well.
Started college, psychology major. Says she wants to help people recover from trauma. We talk every few weeks. She's still processing everything, but she's healing. The door chimed and Rafael's breath caught. Emily walked in, followed by a woman Rafael barely recognized as his ex-wife Sandra. They'd been communicating again, slowly rebuilding what had been destroyed. Emily had reached out first, 3 months after the trial, saying she'd watched every news report and finally understood the truth. The reunion wasn't perfect or magical. 17 years of pain couldn't vanish with an apology. But Emily sat beside her father now, helping him review legal documents, asking questions about his work. She'd inherited his determination, channeled it into becoming the kind of lawyer he'd never been able to afford. Dad, Emily said, pointing to a case file, this one has similar evidence suppression to yours. I think we have grounds for appeal. Rafael smiled, the kind of genuine smile that had seemed impossible a year ago.
Show me.
Later that evening, Rafael stood alone on his apartment balcony, overlooking the city that had tried to bury him. The skyline glittered with lights, indifferent to human suffering or triumph. But Rafael understood something now that he hadn't 17 years ago. Justice wasn't about revenge, though revenge had its place. Justice wasn't about becoming powerful enough to hurt those who'd hurt you. Real justice was about transformation, taking everything they'd tried to use to destroy you and forging it into something that helps others. Judge Caldwell thought power came from his position. Mayor Brennan believed it came from money. Detective Webb assumed it came from authority. They'd all learned differently. Power, real, lasting power, came from integrity. From refusing to become the monster they'd called you. From surviving hell and choosing not to recreate it for others. Rafael's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Another case just came in. Woman served 9 years for fraud she didn't commit. Evidence looks suspicious. You available tomorrow? He typed back immediately, I'll be there. Because this was his life now. Not bitter, not stuck in the past, but actively fighting to prevent others from experiencing what he'd endured. The conspirators had taken 17 years from him, but they hadn't taken his humanity. They tried to make him invisible, and instead they'd created someone who'd spend the rest of his life making sure the invisible were finally seen. The best revenge wasn't destroying them, though watching their empires crumble had felt remarkably satisfying. The best revenge was building something better from the ruins of their corruption. The best revenge was living well, fighting hard, and making sure their crimes led to systemic change that would protect thousands of others. Rafael Souza had entered that courtroom 17 years ago as a simple construction worker. He'd walked out of prison as something more dangerous to corrupt systems everywhere, someone who understood how they worked and was committed to tearing them down brick by brick, case by case, truth by truth. And somewhere in the city, in 12 different prisons, innocent people were waiting for someone to believe them, to fight for them, to refuse to give up even when the system said their cases were closed. Rafael and his team would find them. Because that's what people who've survived injustice do, they make sure others don't have to. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice sometimes requires patience and intelligence rather than immediate action, subscribe to this channel for more true stories about real people who refuse to let corruption win. Your support helps us share these stories with the world, because the first step to fixing a broken system is making sure everyone knows it's broken. They tried to bury Rafael Souza. They forgot he was a seed. And what grew from that darkness became something they never expected, not a victim seeking revenge, but a builder of justice they couldn't corrupt.